Hey guys, recently we talked about the 5 best detachments available to Space Marine players right now, and in this video we'll actually take a look at the opposite, the detachments that you should avoid and what makes them so bad. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The first one is the Lost Brethren, the Blood Angels detachment, which you probably have not seen on the tabletop ever. It has a really cool and interesting idea, and I think it could have been a really powerful one if GW have followed in the path of a different detachment from a different faction, which actually turned out to be better. And the idea here isn't bad, giving Death Company their own detachment to shine in and be extra mad, crazy, and killy in combat. That's just a perfect idea of a detachment in my opinion. That a better option for a detachment of this sort is the Penitent Host in the Sisters Codex, even though it's far from being the most powerful detachment they have in the book, but I think the idea and the concept is much more fitting there than it turned out to be in the Blood Angels one. Unfortunately, this detachment just doesn't deliver, so the rule for the detachment is reroll once to wound for Death Company units if below starting strength, and reroll the wound roll if below half strength. And this may sound strong because wound rerolls are few and far between, and they are very useful and valuable. However, as all such rules, this one is flawed in its core. As a melee army, you really don't want to have to take damage first in order to activate your buff, because that means that first thing you need to do is expose your unit to your enemy fire, and if you know anything about Death Company, you know that it's a glass cannon, so it cannot take a lot of punishment. In the best case scenario, if your unit, like say a 10-man squad with Lemari, survives the first onslaught with like maybe 3 guys left with the best special weapons and Lemari's himself, you are very lucky and maybe you'll get to fight. But having your whole detachment rule rely on your ability to withstand enemy firepower with units that are not durable is really bad. It's very likely that if you get hit first, you won't be able to even enjoy your bonuses in most cases. Just blow past the below starting strength, right into below half strength, and then below ground. Enhancements for this one are pretty mediocre. We ideally want ways to send our guys into crazy, mad run across the board. Some sort of protection for them would be great as well, and a crazy one-off buff. But the best one is probably the Blood Shard that revives your character on a 2+ with 3 wounds. It's not like even a full revive on full wounds, which we've seen in other detachments, so I'm not sure why this one has the abridged version of it. Stratagems aren't bad for this melee detachment. You have the advance and charge, you have a solid melee buff which is +1 to strength attacks and AP, so it's really probably the best stratagem in the whole detachment. Extra long pile-in, fight on death, and sticky objective. So as far as stratagems go, this is a pretty good set for a melee detachment. We have one that buffs the movement, another buffs the movement, which is the pile-in. We have one that just makes a unit deadlier. We have sticky, which frees up your stuff, and fight on death, again also very useful always. That's what makes me sad. This could have been a much better detachment if only the detachment rule was better and there was more interaction between the army and the Death Company units. As always, I want to remind you about my Patreon 40K coaching service. If you're looking for help building your competitive rosters, preparing you for tournaments, or have any questions about your collection in general, check out the links for my Patreon in the description. And big thanks to all the Patreon supporters that are already supporting the channel. We really appreciate it. You can actually see all those glorious names in the description of every video. Number 4 is the Anvil Siege Force Space Marine. So this one is the non-Imperial Fist detachment, which we are going to talk about the new Imperial Fist detachment in a different video, but the main killer of this one is again the detachment rule. It forces you to stay stationary by giving all your guns heavy, which if you don't know, heavy means +1 to hit if you have not moved in your movement phase, and it also gives you +1 to wound if you had heavy already. And 40K is a game that is all about movement, and being forced to stay put by your detachment is a sure way to get wrecked in points. You need to move around to get to objectives and exploit enemies' mistakes and use terrain to your advantage so that your units are protected when you need them to, and they get exposed only when you have to. You cannot do all that when you are being static. There's just nothing really good that you can do if you're static. Sometimes some armies can, like maybe on one unit, say the Knight Crusader advances up into a position where it can see everything it wants to, then it can stay stationary for like a turn or two. That is possible, but as long as it's one unit, that's okay, even if it's a big one. If you want your whole army or the majority of your army to stay stationary, that is going to be a problem, because you cannot really get good lines of sight if you are not moving around. Enhancements aren't bad. They're a stand back up on a 2+ for Gravis model. I mean, it's good to have. Ignore cover for a squad, useful. It's not every day that you have ignore cover in the Space Marine Codex. And 6+ Feel No Pain for whole unit with Battle Shock OC buff. You don't put your OC to 0, you actually half your OC instead when they're Battle Shocked. I mean, it's pretty nice as a bonus to 6+ Feel No Pain. I mean, having like the 6+ Feel No Pain on the unit of 10 Terminators with Storm Shields is not bad, especially considering they have 4 wounds, so they're going to benefit from that immensely. It's not like the Black Templars level of old where they had 5+ Feel No Pain, but it's not bad. Strats are a mixed bag, so there is a pricey 2 CP full reroll to wound against vehicles and monsters. A good stratagem, no doubt, but it's costly, so you probably want a captain for that. 2 times, so 2x your OC in the command phase, but you have to stay put again, so it's not really good. But if you are trying to contest an objective, getting a doubling of OC at an opportune moment can be game-changing, can give you points where you really, really needed them. Sustain hits 1 for shooting, and it becomes critical 5s if you're static. Pretty good stratagem. 2 CP shoot back after being shot at, and pretty interesting 6-inch fallback at the end of the fight phase, but it has limitations. You must end that move either wholly within your deployment zone or within range of an objective marker. But considering it's a full 6-inch fallback, it's pretty possible. The problem with that one is that if you're using it on like a tank or a dreadnought, you still only can move 6 inches, and you have to do that. You have to plan for it right at the end of the fight phase, where you have less information than, say, in your movement phase. For example, you don't know what your tactical cards are going to be. So it's, in that sense, worse than being able to fall back in your movement phase. It does, however, have a benefit of being end of the fight phase. So it means that, for example, if you have charged something, you can then, if you have not killed that and are still in engagement range, you can then do a fallback of up to 6 inches and potentially hide from the future shooting in your opponent's turn. So there is a plus side to it too. I'm surprised this detachment was never revised. They have released the new Imperial Fist detachment now, so you could probably say that it's sort of a revision of it, but the original Anvil Siege Force was never corrected, and I think that's a mistake. You can really easily make it much less horrible just by modifying the rule. The new Votan prioritized efficiency rule, for example, is a good idea of how you could have fixed the Anvil Siege Force. They also have this idea of like you go out and you try to beat the crap out of everyone who tries to get onto your objectives, but once you're there, you can actually bunk down and just hold your ground. And I think this is what Imperial Fists are supposed to be. They're not supposed to be this, okay, if I'm stationary, I'm super powerful as long as I am stationary, but as soon as I move, I'm not great. And it just doesn't work in 40k, unfortunately. You would get one beginning of the game buff to get onto the objectives, and later buffs to stay on the objectives. And that sounds very much like Imperial Fists to me, and hopefully something like that will be a part of the game, maybe in like the Space Marine Codex version 2, or maybe the Codex in the 11th edition. Next, from yellow we go to green. That's a Dark Angels Unforgiven Task Force detachment from the Codex, the Dark Angels Codex. This is yet again an example of a detachment that could have been pretty decent if not for the detachment rule. In this case, we get OC1 when battle shocked instead of OC0, and in the command phase we can also add 1 to the OC for a single unit. Well, the second part, which was added in the balanced data slate because they thought that the detachment rule is just way too bad, and yeah, they were right. It's not bad. The ability to add 1 OC to a particular unit is good for the same reason I mentioned before, because you can then in the command phase decide where you're lacking OC to actually make up the difference with your opponent and potentially flip an objective. That is pretty good. But I mean, getting OC 1 instead of being battle shocked as a detachment rule, that doesn't work in my mind. And it could be good if they added like 2 more these small things, like small buffs, situational buffs to the detachment rule, but only these 2, that's just not enough. It's just way too niche. The enhancements aren't bad actually. They have the 2+ revive for 3 wounds, again, something like we've seen in the Imperial Fist one, or the full wounds if the unit was battle shocked. I mean, it's cute. I wish it was just full wounds, to be honest, because a bunch of detachments already have that, so I don't see the reason why this particular Dark Angels force needs to pay more and jump through more hoops to get the full wounds on the poor character who died just now. A melee weapon enhancement, this one is actually pretty decent. +1 attack, +1 strength, and +1 damage. It's a good, solid set of buffs, and you can make some really nasty characters using this enhancement. And you also get +2 to each of the characteristics if the unit was battle shocked. That is pretty funny. It's not going to come up often, but when it does, it's going to be incredibly fun. Still sucks compared to the Thief of Secrets with Deathwatch, which also has the 3 things that did buffs and +2 to the same characteristic if. But the if for the Thief of Secrets is that you killed a model, if I remember correctly, not even a unit, a model. That one buffs strength, damage, and AP. This one gives attack, strength, and damage. So, I mean, it depends whether you need AP more than you need an extra attack. But both of them are really good. Thief of Secrets being obviously a better option because it's easier to activate the +2 buff. 6+ Feel No Pain for the Ancient squad, and 4+ Feel No Pain if the squad is battle shocked. Again, not a bad enhancement, genuinely a pretty good one. And I mean, 4+ Feel No Pain is just amazing, but it's going to be really hard to activate that one. I wish there was some way to self-battle shock like the Blood Angels detachment. That would be amazing, but as far as I know, there's no such way. Strats are pretty decent too. Lethal hits for shooting and fight phases. Critical 5s if there is anything battle shocked in your army. So it is going to be sort of easier to get that one. And I mean, lethal hits on demand for both shooting and fight phases, it's genuinely not a bad strategy. Like even using that on a 6-man squad of Inceptors that drop down from reserves is going to be significantly increasing their output, and that's essentially mathematically the same as giving them +1 to wound from Oath, which you don't get as Dark Angels. So it's a really, really good strat. I love strats that work in both the fight and the shooting phases. It's almost like having 2 stratagems at the same time. I mean, if something is actually battle shocked in your army, if you're like playing against Tyranids, they're going to be screwed. There is a fallback shoot and charge for 1 CP, intractable, an amazing stratagem, always great to have that. There is heavy ignore cover and assault for 1 unit, again for 1 CP, just an Adeptus Astartes unit that gets all 3 rules at the same time, which that's a really, really good buff. So for something like a Redemptor Dreadnought. A shoot back stratagem for 1 CP when a model in your unit dies, and a 2 CP flat -1 to wound in combat. Flat meaning that it doesn't ask you to be lower toughness than the strength of the attack, which means that you can potentially get to, I don't know, 5s to wound or even 6s to wound on attacks that are pretty low strength, and that can be useful in many situations. All pretty good strats, generally speaking, a really solid strat suite. This feels like they really wanted the theme of it to be around battle shocks, and it just doesn't make much sense in most games because unfortunately battle shock is this thing that exists in the game, but it only touches you in the wrong moments and when you don't want it to be, and because a very big portion of the armies in the game don't ever interact with them unless they actually need to like roll it because their unit is below half strength. And because of that, this buff is very situational, and that just is not great. I wish there was maybe like one extra part to the detachment rule that would allow you to get something useful for the army, and that might be enough to convince some people to play this one. But just compare it to the Wrath of the Rock or, God forbid, Gladius, and you'll see why this detachment is almost never played, even though it does really have great potential. Next is Champions of Fenris, Space Wolves. So, as all the bad detachment, rule for this one is really, really bad. This is the Grotmus one that we got in near Christmas for the Space Wolves. You get to do the old heroic intervention into enemies. So if you do not play 8th edition, heroic intervention is essentially when you get to charge, or sort of like charge, in your opponent's turn when they are uncareful enough to put their units close to your units. And in this case, the distance to activate that is 3 inches. So if there is something 3 inches away from your infantry and walker units, you get to do the heroic intervention, so charge into them. And you also get +1 OC on your Terminators if they're not battle shocked. So if you are battle shocked, you still be OC 0, but if you're not, you're going to be OC 2, like as if you're battle line. The idea of basing the entire rule around your opponent forgetting to pre-measure 3 inches is not really appealing to me, because it's not going to work against anyone who just has a tape measure in their hands more than 5 seconds during a game. This in theory should prevent your opponent from like easily staging around your move, blocking your stuff just in front of, setting that up in front of your Terminator guys with impunity. In reality, this will rarely come up, and that's annoying. Enhancements here are pretty mediocre too. The only good one is the Wolf's Wisdom, which actually expands the charge range for the unit for the detachment rule from 3 inches to 6, making it actually useful, because that's the rule where the distance is actually what makes all the difference, the length. So to speak, pardon me the pun. If it was like a 9-inch aura for every single model, that would be absolutely freaking crazy and OP. But as 6-inch aura is good, and having it at least on one unit is great, but one unit is not gonna win you the game. Stratagems aren't bad too, but they don't really serve to help a melee army that well. They're pretty general. Lethal or sustained hits for infantry, stealth in shooting for your infantry, sticky objectives for infantry, walker, and AP down use stratagem. So, I mean, it's not bad, it's not a bad suite of strats, but it's nothing really to write home about as well. Overall, there's just no good reason to run this one when you have the new sagas from the new Space Wolves Codex. It just needs the Champions of Russ treatment. I made a typo there, I meant to say Champions of Russ. So that what they did with the original Index detachment, they really went there and they gave us the ability to have a saga from the beginning of the game, and that really made the balance much better. So the only way to save Champions of Fenris is to do something radical like that, but it's going to be difficult because they've already released 3 different Space Wolves detachments for the Codex, so they'll need to go into depth here to find some way to make this all work. And I am sure it's possible, but I'm not sure they are willing to invest the time. So this one is really not great. Last but definitely not least is the pain of the beginning of 10th edition, where I was really hopeful that this one is going to be super cool, and I feel like there is a lot of potential that is lost, unfortunately, in the first company task force Space Marines one. This could have been very, very flavorful, and yet unfortunately was forgotten in the whirlwind of 10th edition detachments and really never used again. Rule is strong, but it only works once per game. You get rerolls to wound against your oath target, which, by the way, if you have joined us sometime in the 10th edition, you might not know this, but the oath of moment, the Spaceman rule to get rerolls to hit, initially when they just released the index, was full rerolls to hit and full rerolls to wound. So that was some crazy times. And this detachment just gives you that old oath back once per game. And this would be a great 2 CP stratagem, but I really don't like the idea of this being the detachment rule, because one-off detachment rule needs to be just game changing, and being able to absolutely, utterly annihilate and destroy one thing in your opponent's army is not going to be that. Enhancements for this one are all using the same kind of idea. You buff the unit once per game, but you buff the bearer of the enhancement permanently. So Fear Made Manifest, for example, is a fun one, allowing you to destroy models in units that fail battle shock tasks within 6 inches. So I guess this one is not really a good example for that. But the Iron Resolve is a good example. It gives you a 5-up Feel No Pain for the bearer and a 1-off 5+ Feel No Pain for the unit for the phase. So you can stick that on, I don't know, something like those Assault Terminators and get them to be resilient once per game in a single phase. Threats are kind of meh. I mean, you have a good one to stack with Fear Made Manifest called Terrifying Proficiency. It's a 6-inch splash of battle shock tests when your veteran unit, which is like Terminators, Sternguard Vets, Vanguard Vets, kills a unit in combat. There is an uppy downy stratagem for Terminators, useful but nothing really game-changing. Sticky for veteran units, again, useful, nothing massive. +1 to hit for veterans, +1 to wound, or +1 to wound if below half strength, and the best one of the whole detachment, which is the -1 damage in the fight phase for veteran units, for 1 CP as well. Overall, this just feels like a detachment that needs more love and work from the design team, and for one reason or another, they just did not finish it. They had a good idea to make a cool, fun, a veterans detachment for Space Marines, but it did not stick, unfortunately, and it's still possible for them to do it. I just, again, don't think they are going to invest the time. They have a lot of other stuff on their plate. Perhaps the Codex Space Marines version 2, or the one in the 11th edition, is going to fix that issue for us. Let's hope. After all, you always have Gladius to console you with its amazing versatility. Let me know which detachment you consider to be absolutely horrible and the worst, and I very well might have not mentioned that particular one, so I'm curious what you have to say. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.